What's up, everyone? Sean Archer here. Guys, I want to tell you a story today that was actually quite amazing. I thought it was. So, when you get out in the community and you start talking to people, you just never know who you're going to meet and what you're going to hear. And I heard the most interesting story today that involved an old half Cherokee bounty hunter, two Colt 45's, and John Wayne. True story, verifiable and everything. So my dad and I, we go, he says, hey, do you want to meet this old timer up the road? He's a friend of mine, he's an old bounty hunter. And he takes this 45 over with him. He said, I wanted to show him this Colt 45 and do some work on it because it was kind of old and a little bit rusty. And so we go over there, we get to talk, and he comes outside, and he's an interesting guy with more stories than you probably have time to listen to. But anyways, so we get to talking, and he's fixing the pistol, and he goes, I have two of these signed by John Wayne. And my dad and I kind of look at each other and we're like, that's it? You know, you're not going to say anything else? And so I say to him, well, I bet you that's an interesting story, huh? And he goes, yeah. And he's kind of not in a hurry to tell us the story. I said, and I kept prodding him. I said, come on, you want to tell us a bit more? And he says, well, years ago, I used to own a shipping, like a freight company, truck driving. And so he goes, one day we get these two crates and they're too big for a conventional rig. And so the guy says, these are from France and the address is Hollywood, California. You want to take them, you know, all the way to the West Coast? And he goes, yeah, I'll take them. And so he puts these two containers on there, these two crates, and heads for Hollywood, California. And all he has is an address, no name, nothing. And so he gets to Hollywood, California, he pulls up to this big gate that says JW on the front, and he's allowed to go in, and he parks the truck, and a guy comes out, and he says, he'll be with you in a moment. And again, he has no idea who he is. And so he's sitting there, and all of a sudden his mouth drops open, and John Wayne comes out to meet him, and he says, hey, I'm John Wayne. And he goes, yeah, I know. And he says, do you have any idea what's in these containers? He says, no, I have no idea. And John Wayne says, well, they're two old panheads, which belong to John Wayne's father. He had them restored by an American guy living in France, who completely restores and refurbishes old stuff like that. And he had them shipped back. And the guy, I guess I'm not going to use any names or anything like that. I'm up here in North Georgia at my parents' house. And again, this is just a guy who lives up the road, who my dad met, who, again, he is quite a character. He's half Cherokee. He used to be a bounty hunter. This guy has been shot, stabbed. He has shot people. He's a rough dude. But anyways, John Wayne says, hey, come on inside. So he brings him inside, and he takes him to his gun room. And this guy described John Wayne's gun room as being much bigger than his own house. In fact, we were on his property. He pointed to the tree line. He goes, it was about from here to that tree line, just wall to wall with hundreds and hundreds of guns. John Wayne, as you know, was a avid gun collector. And I mean, this is back in the days when John Wayne and Elvis, these guys were some of the most famous, richest people in America. They were just absolutely worshipped in that time. And anyways, so he starts showing them around, and John Wayne's lawyer's there, you know, working that day. And this guy goes, he looks at these two Colt 45's, these beautiful Colt 45's in this mahogany box. And John Wayne goes, "You like those?" He's like, "Yeah, that caught my eye. These are pretty awesome." And the guy says, "Well, you can have them." And he goes, "What?" He says, "Yeah, I'll give them to you." And he has a picture of him and John Wayne and those guns, and his lawyer was there that day who wrote up a bill of authentication and everything for him, stamped it, signed it, and he has his signatures on the guns. And my dad and I are looking at each other going like, "You know those things are worth a lot of money." And he goes, "Yeah, I'm sure they're worth, $1 million or something." He says, "I'm not interested in selling them." He's got quite a gun collection of his own, as well as a lot of stories about his life. And the funniest thing was, he says, as impressive as those guns were, if I ever were to sell those guns, I would keep the box that those guns came in. He says that mahogany box, whoever made that box was an absolute master craftsman. More impressive than the guns, he said, was that box. He said those guns fit so perfectly in that box that if you shook that box with a gun inside, it wouldn't rattle. It was perfect to those pistols. And I thought that was totally hilarious. Of course, I've seen some cool boxes, but I don't know. Anyhow, guys, like and subscribe if you like strange things like this. Get out there and talk to people. I have heard and met some people. I've been all around the world. I've met some absolutely amazing people, some incredible people with just the wildest stories that you could not make up in Hollywood. And again, this is just a guy who lives 2 houses up the most. If you drove past his house, you wouldn't even think twice. This guy has an incredible story like that. He has some other stories that I'm not even sure I'd want to repeat, but 2 Colt 45's, John Wayne, and a half Cherokee bounty hunter. I thought that was an interesting story. Anyways, you know the drill. Like and subscribe. Be a blessing to someone today. And as always, TIA. This is America. I'm Sean Archer, and I'll see you in the next video. I'm out.